Hello, thank you for tuning into this episode of Mr. D Reading the Hope Chest. If you notice in the background, I have two roses. One is a yellow colored rose, and one is a red colored rose. During this women's suffrage movement, you had the suffragists, who were people that were in favor of allowing women the right to vote, and then you had anti-suffragists who were not in favor for women having the right to vote. So yellow roses were worn by those who were suffragists who wanted women to vote, and then there were red roses that were worn by anti-suffragists or people who didn't want people to have the right to vote. So if you look on the cover of the book, you'll notice that Violet has a yellow rose in her hair. That indicates that we can make the inference that if she's wearing a yellow rose, and we know that yellow roses were worn by people who were in favor of women having the right to vote, that we can make the inference that Violet was in favor of having women the right to vote. If you notice, though, she's going to get a rose put in her head on a train station, and she's not going to know what it means in this chapter. I want you to notice very carefully what color of rose gets put into her hair and that she doesn't really know the meaning of, because that's going to play a very important role in the next few chapters here. I'm on page 120. You can listen with me. You can read along, or you can do both. In Nashville, an army of women greeted the train, their arms full of flowers. They swarmed among the men and women getting off the train, thrusting yellow and red roses at them. Violet stepped off onto the platform, holding the small bundle that contained her spare clothes. The train had pulled into a huge train shed with a high, soaring roof that covered all of the rows of tracks and platforms. Violet had never seen anything like it, but she didn't have time to study it. She looked along the train, searching for the colored car. There it was, all the way at the back. Violet hurried over to where colored men, women, and children were getting down from the two exits, carrying valises. She watched every single person get off the colored car, but she didn't see Myrtle. So it must have been Myrtle who had chased after Mr. Martin this morning. And then what had happened to them? Had the Palmer agent caught Mr. Martin? If he had, then what would happen to Myrtle? Violet paced anxiously back and forth on the platform, staring at the train and willing it to produce Myrtle. But it didn't, of course. Violet didn't know what to do. She and Myrtle had run away together. It was a joint project, and it felt wrong to have gotten separated from her. Besides, she was older than Myrtle and ought to have looked after her better. She went into the train station, worrying. The station was even fancier than the one in Washington, though not as big. It had a high, arched stained glass ceiling and mosaic tiles on the floor. A woman with a basket of red roses assailed Violet. "Wear a red rose," she commanded, smiling sweetly and holding one out to Violet. Violet took it uncertainly. "How much are they?" She didn't want to buy one, but wasn't sure how to say no politely. "They're free, dear. We just want everyone to wear a rose to show her support for the cause." "Oh, thank you." The stem was wrapped in paper tape with a long pin like a hat pin through it. The woman helped Violet pin it to the collar of her dress. Violet's eyes wandered over to a set of windows at the side of the grand room, which had a sign on them that said "Colored Waiting Room." "There," said the woman. "Now you look lovely. Where are you staying, dear?" With my sister," said Violet. A group of suffragists, some from the train and some who had greeted it, had joined arms in the middle of the mosaic floor and were doing a little dance, singing. "Oh dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? Women are wanting to vote. Women have husbands, they are protected. Women have sons by whom they're directed. Women have fathers, they're not neglected. Why are they wanting to vote?" Violet did not see Miss Dexter in the circle, but she wouldn't mind losing her. She who had worn thin on better acquaintances. She didn't see Miss Kelly anywhere. "I'm Miss Charlotte Rowe," said the woman, extending her hand. "Miss Violet Mayhew," said Violet, shaking hands. "Is your sister staying with us at the Hermitage Hotel?" Miss Rowe said. "I don't recognize that name, Mayhew. Or is your sister a married lady?" "No, she's not married," said Violet. "I'm surprised she didn't meet you at the station." "She didn't know which train I was coming on," Violet said, which wasn't exactly a lie. "Well, come along with me to the Hermitage," said Miss Rowe. "We'll get it all settled there." Myrtle could think of no better plan. She was worried about Myrtle and about Mr. Martin, of course, but she might be just moments away from finding Chloe at last. Chloe would know how to go about finding Myrtle. Chloe would make everything all right. Violet followed Miss Charlotte Rowe, who handed her basket of red roses to another lady, and said that she was leaving. They went out to a darkening city street, lit at intervals by globe-shaped street lamps. A tired-looking horse clopped along, pulling a wagon with Overton and Bush ice painted on the side. They crossed the street, stepping around the horse manure and over streetcar tracks, and turned down another street. They passed movie theaters and vaudeville theaters and drugstores, which, even though they were closed, advertised the fact they had soda fountains, with fountains formed of electric light bulbs blinking on in succession, to look like streaming water. Well, sort of like it. Violet was surprised to see such a lively, modern city after the quiet towns and vast wooded mountains they had passed through on the train. Unfortunately, Nashville also seemed to be a very hot place, even at night. Violet could feel sweat trickling down her back inside her undervest. "I know it looks quiet," said Miss Rowe. This is the still before the storm, as they say. There's been a battle brewing that's unlike anything the South has seen since the Civil War." She smiled grimly. "I'm from up north, as I gather. You are too, Miss Mayhew." "Yes, Pennsylvania," said Violet. "A state we fought long and hard for." "Well, we have a battle on our hands here, Violet. The other side is pouring every effort into Tennessee. They've sent in some of their most unscrupulous... here we are." The Hermitage Hotel was 10 stories high and mobbed, the crowd pouring out the grand entryway onto the street. Violet started toward the entrance, but Miss Rowe pulled her arm. "The ladies' entrance is around the side, Violet." They went around the corner under a vertical sign that reached up the side of the building and spelled out Hermitage in electric light bulbs. They went in through the much smaller ladies' entrance, then down a hallway and past the elevators to the lobby. There was a crowd of women and men around the elevators. and a lady in a pink satin dress called out, "Charlotte, come here a minute." Miss Rowe went to the lady, and Violet wandered on into the lobby. The lobby was as crowded as the train station had been. Violet looked up at the high stained glass skylight, which was dark now, set in an elaborately decorated ceiling, with plaster bosses and garlands of fruit. There was a balcony, and people crowded along the railing, looking down at the people in the lobby. Violet couldn't hear what anyone was saying. The babble around her was too loud, with hundreds of voices echoing off the marble floors and walls. In fact, she was getting an awful headache. Violet looked around and found the registration desk. She made her way through the crowd of people in yellow roses and red roses and past an old man wearing what she thought was a Confederate Army uniform. The desk clerk didn't seem to notice her. "I beg your pardon," she ventured. "No rooms," said the desk clerk, looking up. "I have no rooms left, small or large, with or without conveniences. No rooms for Suffs, no room for Antis, no rooms for the Southern Women's Rejection League, the Men's Ratification Committee, the Tennessee Constitutional League, the National Women's Party, the League of Women Voters, the Confederate Widow Society, or the Women's Christian Temperance Union." "I'm not here with any of those," Violet said hurriedly. "I was wondering if... Could you tell me if my sister is staying here, Miss Mayhew?" "Suffs are on the 3rd floor," the clerk went on, seeming not to have heard her. "Antis are on the 7th and 8th. Anti-headquarters are on the mezzanine. Miss Carrie Chapman Catt and Mr. Joe Hanover are on the 3rd floor, although not, of course," he sniffed delicately, "together. Miss Joseph Anderson Pearson is on the 7th floor. Anti's hospitality suite is on the 8th floor. People who take both the Antis and the Suff side... Mr. Walker." Violet turned. A woman was calling to a man in a black suit who seemed anxious to avoid her. She called his name again, and he turned reluctantly to face her. She looked very angry. "Who got to you?" she demanded. "How much did they pay for you, Mr. Walker? Was it 30 pieces of silver?" Silence fell in the crowded room. Everyone drew back and watched. Mr. Walker put a hand to his throat and took a step back, looking shocked. "Was it the Louisville and Nashville Railroad that bought you off, Speaker Walker?" the woman hissed. "How dare you?" Mr. Walker jammed his Panama hat onto his head, spun on his heel, and stalked out the hotel. People started talking again, a little nervously. "Huh," said the desk clerk. "That's the Speaker of the Tennessee House, Seth Walker. He was one of the Suff's strongest supporters. If he's turned coat, I don't see how they can win." "You mean he changed sides?" said Violet. "So it would seem," said the desk clerk. "Interesting." He dipped his pen in ink and made a little note on his desk blotter, which Violet saw was covered with tally marks. "Is there a Miss Mayhew staying at the hotel?" she repeated. The clerk opened his ledger and ran a finger down it. "No, I don't have any Mayhew. Is she a suff or an anti?" "There you are, Violet!" Miss Rowe came bustling up. "Did you find your sister?" "She's not here," said Violet, feeling desperate. She had lost Myrtle and Mr. Martin, and she couldn't find Chloe. She was completely alone. She felt like crying. Miss Rowe looked unconcerned. "Squeeze her into one of our rooms for tonight, Frankie. Put her in with Miss Esquadrille. There's an extra bed in there. Violet, come down to the mezzanine once you get settled. You can meet some of really important leaders in our movement, like Miss Josephine Anderson Pearson. Oh, there's Mr. Byrne. I must speak to him. Excuse me." Violet looked back at the desk clerk. He ran his finger down a page, frowning. "I'll put you in with Miss Esquadrille, then. It's room 907, on the top floor, but one just below the dancing." He turned to the hook-covered tag board behind him and selected a key with a brass tag and handed it to Violet. Elevators around the corner. Chapter 11. Finding Chloe. Thanks for listening.